Hello, my name is Nehan Munasinghe. Finding My Place in a New Land podcast series is based on the articles written by me for the Sri Lankan's newspaper. Thank you for listening. As a 13-year-old boy in Sri Lanka, I knew very little about New Zealand, and my dad decided to move there. And our family just went along for the ride. To help us settle, he moved a few months before us and set up camp. So when we arrived in New Zealand, it was fairly comfortable, I would say, because it's done all the initial hard work. So we arrived at the Wellington International Airport, and he picked us up, and we were driving to Lower Hutt, which is a fairly big town by New Zealand standards in Wellington. I remember the fear and excitement that rose as I stared at all the rolling hills. Wellington is surrounded by these beautiful green hills, and they provide a great backdrop, and really that was a pretty incredible introduction to the New Zealand landscape. So on this day, a lifelong dream of a young boy from Colombo came true. I always wanted to live in a cold country, and well, New Zealand was going to be it. Over the next 18 years, I had many triumphs, defeats, and incredible moments. So in this series of podcasts, I will share some of the experiences that may provide you with some insight into a young immigrant mind. And if you're a young immigrant yourself, I hope that listening to this podcast will let you know that you're not alone. The challenges you're facing are very much common across many of the immigrants around the world, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that you will figure it out, that you will finally find your place in wherever your new land is. Soon after I migrated, I enrolled in high school. Well, I didn't really enroll. My dad had enrolled me at Hutt Valley High School in Lower Hutt in Wellington. I felt the weight of being thousands of miles from all that I knew. I thought to myself that I was fortunate to have the ability to at least speak and understand English well. But I was in for a big surprise. As I found out, Kiwi spoke English very differently. On my first meeting, a lady from the school admin office asked me if I was jet lagged. Now you can understand, as a nervous boy on his first day of school, I was very perplexed as to why I was being asked about a jet. I spent the next few moments just in utter confusion. I thought to myself, this lady's crazy. In Sinhala you say Meganita Pisu. That's Sinhala is the language I spoke in Sri Lanka, and if you ever visit Sri Lanka, it is an amazing place and highly recommend it. And you will hear plenty of Sinhala, and it's a beautiful language. Anyway, coming back to the point, I was still very nervous, and at least she had explained to me what jet lag was at that point. And that was the start. My first lesson in school, I would say. uh, and a rather confusing yet memorable one. And despite all my nerves, I knew the most nerve-wracking thing that lied ahead of me was just meeting my class for the first time. And I didn't know if I would be accepted. And I had to just leave my fate in the hands of a bunch of strangers. Now, I didn't expect any miracles, but, you know, you got to hope for the best, right? So when I arrived at my first school lesson, I really felt that dismissive attitude of my classmates. You know, it's just that teenage look, it's not happening for you. Since I joined school a few months into the year, I had missed that initial phase where a lot of friendships form. And the other thing was that I had never been to intermediate. So in New Zealand, you've got primary, intermediate, and then high school. So high school starts from year 9 when you're around 13 years old. And some of these friendship groups that were in high school predate the high school period. And in a place like New Zealand where a lot of kids tend to go to the local schools, this was the case. So there was a Hutt Intermediate, and a lot of the kids in Hutt Valley High School came from Hutt Intermediate. So I was at a disadvantage from day one. I knew I was the outsider and I had to find a way to fit in. Man, the kids in my class might as well have been another species of human. And I just kind of sat in a corner trying to decipher this situation. Like, it was quite a challenging endeavor. Not to be degrading to, well, myself and I guess all immigrants, but I almost felt like a foreign chimpanzee in a zoo of humans. It was just an unnatural feeling, a feeling I had never felt before. When I was in Sri Lanka, everyone was like me. I didn't have to think twice about trying to fit in, trying to speak a different language. We have two main languages that are spoken in Sri Lanka. So if you're a Sinhalese student, you spoke Sinhala and English. If you're a Tamil student, you spoke Tamil and English. And I guess a lot of Tamil students also were quite good in speaking Sinhala, being the majority language of the country. Anyway, this was going to be a challenging time in my life, and even at that age, as a teenager, I understood that. I think I was almost giving myself time for the gravity of the situation to sink in. The Kiwi accent is a real enigma for most immigrants. As a nervous teenager, this is a far worse ordeal. I recall, it was year 9, where a debate arose in the class where the gay marriage should be legalized. Now, you must understand, New Zealand is quite forward thinking in a lot of these kind of issues, and they're open to discussing a lot of things that around the world that may be considered controversial, because people can be expressive and society is very accepting of, well, different. So, as this debate was raging in the class, and the class had split into two parts, well, it was a tragic moment for me, because how can you be part of a debate that you couldn't understand a single word in? And here I was, just sitting in the middle while the entire class had split into two parts. So, pro gay marriage and against. And I just sat in the middle of a divided class, entirely clueless and frankly ashamed of my inadequacy. And I'm not sure if the teachers could have done much to make me feel better at that moment. Maybe if they tried really hard to try and explain what the topic of the debate was to me, I may have chosen a side, but who really knows? I mean, it's kind of hard to go back in retrospect to that moment and think, what was the right thing to do? After all, I was a clueless teenager. Little did I know that this debate would eventuate across the entire nation of New Zealand until the legalization of gay marriage in 2013. So it's a pretty significant moment, I think, and a very significant topic, but unfortunately, I was not equipped to be part of it at that time. Most days I was frustrated at not being able to understand the conversations of fellow students. Teenagers are, unforgiving. If you do not speak their lingo, you just don't. And they would do very little to try and understand what you're saying. It was going to be an uphill battle to get acquainted with this unusual accent and learn Kiwi teenage speak. So let me give you some examples of some Kiwi words. First of all, bro. So that's just another word for brother. And most likely not just your actual brother, but just a friend. There's cuz, which is cousin or a close friend. Skucks, and that's cool or fancily dressed fella that appeals to the opposite sex. But if you really wanted to put the emphasis on the word, you go skicks. And that's a high, like, man, you're looking good today. There's chur, and that's thank you. There's munted, broken or drunk. Chundered, bro. Just, that's you vomited. You egg, that's idiot. Gutted, disappointed. There's a, and that's what are you talking about? Sus, suspicious. Flag that. Give up. Pash, kiss. Yohungus, a person that's often hungry or eats often. Crack up, that's funny. Mean, that's awesome or great. Straight up, that means honestly. And this is just a little intro, so these words were used pretty frequently. And these communication problems were further compounded by my pronunciation of words such as hose and horse, hole and hole. with minimal distinction, really. I mean, even to this day, I have to make an effort to distinguish between these words, and hence most of the verbal exchanges with other kids ended with "I," because they had no idea what I was talking about. And so when I reminisce about these memories, they seem pretty funny now, but honestly, I guess back then they were pretty traumatic. So, fair to say that being a teenager in any country is a tough ask. The social awkwardness, the constant biological changes, the relentless mental uncertainties, they really form the cornerstones of being a teen. And you add in a new language into the mix and a different culture, it's a whole other ball game. So I really had to figure that out, and I think most immigrant teens have to figure this out. So as time goes by, you kind of learn to deal with the lingo, you learn to deal with the accent, but you always feel a little bit like an outsider. You always feel like, well, I am trying to fit in, but I'm not really part of the group. And I think it takes many, many years before you can really say you're part of the crew. You really do fit in. You can't just walk up to a teen in high school and be like, bro, what are you up to? It just doesn't fly, like you add in the Sri Lankan fresh off the boat accent and lack of understanding what you're gonna hear back, mixed in with the nerves, and it comes out just a whole other way. It's like, it's just not nice. It is just not the way you can bridge that gap very easily, and nobody has answers to these at these early stages. And even if someone told you it's gonna be fine, you're gonna figure it out, you'll fit in, it's easily said than done, honestly. And teens just are not accepting by nature. As I mentioned earlier, dramatic changes that you go through as a teen means that any extra challenge is amplified. Because Maori culture is quite prominent in New Zealand and it is a huge part of the Kiwi identity, which I will touch on in a later episode, kids from an early age do learn to understand diversity, but at the same time, even under those circumstances, it can be a tough ask for them to try and relate to Sri Lankan culture in my case. So I don't really blame them for acting the way that they did. And really, I feel like some of those challenges that you go through in those early stages make it all the more sweeter when you figure it out, when you figure out where you fit in and where you find the most comfort. Over the years, for sure, I have made plenty of friends with other immigrants, and funnily enough, when we share stories, it does seem to resonate with each other. So, and I hope that throughout this series of podcasts, it'll be evident to you. You will see that these connections are universal and they transcend across continents, across countries, across cultures. At the end of the day, as immigrants in a new land, you're telling your story to a whole other world. Whether they like it or not, you're there and you're there to stay. And you just have to find your place. Thanks for listening.